Morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here, honoured to be asked to be here to give some perspective to this formidable group of brains on a sort of perennial topic, at least as long as I've been in the industry, and one that is so important, healing the brand boardroom rift. And on a personal level, I've just moved back to London after 7 years working out on the West Coast, so maybe there's some reinvigoration of my social life that can happen here as well, because I think probably London's forgotten about me. So just quickly to touch on 21st Century Brand, my company. You may not know who we are. We founded in 2018. We're basically the team that helped build the global Airbnb brand from 2014 to 2018, and kind of learned a lot on that rocket ship, just seeing what happens when you combine a really disruptive, powerful product that changes a way a category works, a really powerful brand idea and driving that into every area of the business, and a really passionate community that can drive the brand in a different way to what I'd experienced before in terms of thinking about being a consumer-driven company and really learning how a community-driven company works and working with brands. So we learned a lot in that. Got a lot of missteps, but I got a lot of things right. And at a certain point, we thought, actually, there's a real business here because there's so many companies that are facing these dynamics. It's not just Airbnb. There's so many businesses now that to scale really need to combine kind of innovative technology, community, and brand in a new way. And so in our first year, we've worked with we've been honoured to work with quite a few of the founders and leaders of some of the world's most innovative companies like Pinterest, Uber Eats, Intuit, N26, and so on. So it's been an amazing time for us. And it's also given me some good lessons about the topic that I've been asked to talk about, which is what can we learn from the way that brands are scaling in the US, the new wave. And I should say, they are not perfect at all. There's a lot they can learn from Europe and the UK as well, and that's partly why I'm setting up our European division now, because there's a lot of missteps happening there. But there is, I think, some really important learnings which I think can go towards the subject that we're talking about. The first lesson really is, I think, that the most influential brands of this century are built in a different way. They're going to be built in a different way. The playbook is different to when you're thinking about how do you build those iconic brands of the 20th century, the Nikes, the Coca-Colas, and so on. It's not that the whole playbook's got to be thrown out, but there are some big differences. And for us, our thesis putting forward here is that they are built on excellence in 4 pillars. And all 4 have to work together. So the number 1 is purpose-led, so to really ensure that their scale is to the benefit of the communities that they're trying to serve and help and empower. Secondly, that they are really community-driven, and that's really about how do they unlocking the power and the creativity of the communities and the customers that they serve to help drive the business, but doing that in a really meaningful way with meaningful incentives so that they can really help improve marketing and help improve product. Third is around being tech-enabled, so there's a really world-class data-driven product at the heart of it that can scale, but also give emotional intimacy. And that doesn't mean they have to be a tech company, but there needs to be a tech enablement happening there. And finally, something which obviously has always been the case, a really, really strong narrative. Because you can have a brilliant purpose and a great community, but if the purpose isn't that interesting, it's not actually going to really scale you publicly, and that story isn't going to really drive a lot of growth and a lot of interest and a lot of share of voice and all of those things. So you need all those 4 things working together. That is our thesis, and it's a thesis which we kind of learned on the job and worked out through trying. But Airbnb really redefining those 4 pillars and putting belonging at the heart of the organization in everything they do, from the marketing through to policy, through to the host inductions, through to obviously the product experience, probably most importantly. It really did drive a huge transformation and left them from moving from being a kind of interesting outsider back in 2014 to being the most influential and commercially valuable travel brand on the planet by 2018, and a lot of things working together there. But it was a powerful lesson. So now I want to go kind of deeper into each of those pillars and just look at different companies who are kind of nailing it in those areas and see what can we learn from them. So some mini cases, and then I'm going to pull together just like 4 things at the end, which I think can help with this debate from the US perspective. So number 1, purpose-led. Who does it well? I mean, I think before just going into that, I think it's the context around purpose is obviously a hot topic conversation right now. There's a lot of evangelists, a lot of cynics, and I think both of those viewpoints are both valid because it really depends on how committed the companies are to that purpose. But I think this is interesting. I don't know if many of you saw this, but in August 2019, the Business Roundtable, which is basically the 181 most powerful CEOs in America, committed to this public statement of the purpose of a corporation, where they stated it's no longer just about shareholder value primacy. It's actually about delivering value to 5 different groups, which is communities, customers, suppliers, employees, and obviously still shareholders, which is actually a massive shift, because the US economy has been driven by the shareholder primacy model for over 70 years. And I think it's interesting when we're talking about a rift between brand and boardroom, and yet the kind of boardrooms, certainly in the States, and I sense over here more as well, are really coming towards purpose, and brand and purpose are so interlinked. So I think it's almost a side topic, but brand and purpose should almost be interchangeable in some way. So if the boards are moving towards purpose, then why are we having this rift with brand? Maybe it's about the way we're defining brand and thinking about brand. So that's important, and this is an encouraging statement, but it's just words, and we now have to see whether they really deliver on this. So moving into a couple of examples of brands who really are delivering action in this area. Number one is Bumble, who are a phenomenal business, 4 years old, already at 50 million active users, on average using it around 100 minutes a day, and grown very organically, very quickly in a very competitive and commoditized marketplace. And I think a lot of that is due to they are genuinely a purpose-led organization. It's a very clear, simple, but difficult purpose, which is really empowering connections and equality in relationships, obviously particularly from the female orientation. And they've really delivered in terms of driving their growth, the purpose across everything they do. So obviously the product is massively important. Only women can initiate conversations on Bumble, as some of you may know. Statistically, some of you will know from this. And that's obviously important. Women always make the first move. That's really powerful. Secondly, the employee experience. 80% of their leadership are women. And that's incredibly rare still, and a powerful statement for what makes them a special company. And third, I think in culture, this example, they consistently take stands on issues that matter for their purpose and barriers to equality. So in their home state, Whitney Wolfe Herd realized, that she's the founder, that sending unsolicited dick pics was still somehow legal, and rightfully took a public stand on that, invested a lot of time in that, and overturned the law. And they consistently do these sorts of things, and I think it's a big reason why they've had such a phenomenal trajectory in a very crowded marketplace. Second example here is a much older company, but one which is really, I think, almost renewed and recommitted to a mission around seeking the truth and helping people understand the world. Again, really simple, but really powerful. And again, really put it into the product, the journalism bench, the way that the product experience. You're reading New York Times, you're hit with these quite difficult but very important investigations quite a lot. And there might be issues you don't necessarily want to read about on a Monday morning or whatever. What's really going on with the refugee crisis? What is the legacy of slavery? What's happening in the transport system and the corruption there? They commit to that, they deliver it. The marketing is very, very simple, and it's all about a conversation around truth and the difficulty of really finding the truth for journalists and the importance of it. And they just shine a light on what their journalists are doing. And again, I think it's really working for them in a very difficult time in the media. They're now at 2.5 million paid subscribers by the end of 2018. They doubled paid subscribers in under a year. So it's a phenomenal kind of turnaround story for the failing New York Times, as it's famously known by their great leader. So secondly, community-driven. And this is really, as I said, it's about how do you unlock and really harness the creativity and energy and passion of the customers and other communities to help drive the product and brand forward. And it's really different, I think, to thinking about people as consumers, and which can quite often lead to, sort of a sense of like value exploitation in a way, and value leverage versus really creating shared value. And I think 2 examples here which I think are really powerful. This is a really obvious one, but I think it's just so important as an example because it's so omnipresent. But Apple's Shot on iPhone campaign is just a really brilliant community-driven initiative, which has been going, I think, for over 5 years now. And what I love about it is 3 things. One, it's really authentic because all they're doing is shining a light on what people are doing every day on the platform using the Apple technology, which is taking photos. And so many times when companies think about doing community engagement and that sort of thing, you quite get often these sort of well-meaning but sort of odd initiatives where you're trying to get people to do something different or something a bit weird, and it's for a good cause, but it's a bit weird to do it, and it doesn't really work quite a lot of the time. People can smell that it's off, whereas this is an example, it's totally authentic. Secondly, obviously, there's a lot of incentive for people to get involved. If you're an ordinary photographer, it's brilliant to get an Apple billboard or to be given a brief by Apple on Instagram. It's phenomenal. And third, I think it really helps communities outside as well, because you're turning advertising space into simple art photography, and there's a genuine benefit for people to see cool pictures of dogs underwater or their favorite artists photographed. It's a real benefit, and obviously the most important benefit is for the company themselves. This has been I think one of the most effective campaigns of this decade, certainly according to the Effies, and I know we might not think the Effies are quite as powerful as the IPAs or as rigorous, but it's won the global Effie a number of times running. So there's something really powerful in what they're doing there. A much younger company, a great example of being community-driven and driving value from that is Glossier. So again, a bit like Bumble, under 5 years old, create a huge amount of value in a short amount of time, led by a really strong female founder, now valued at 1.2 billion. And I think with Glossier, it's all been shaped by the community from the start. If you look into the Gloss with their companion blog, the comments section of that is basically their open innovation platform. I know their marketing folks quite well. A lot of the advocacy, a lot of the recommendations, a lot of the product iterations happen because of all the feedback and conversation. It's sort of definitely moderated by the company there. They're not diving in and setting challenges exactly, but they're just stoking the conversation and leading by example. And they always try and think of, we never want to think of people as just being passive, as just buying our products. We want them always involved. So when they introduce content franchises like Top Shelf, immediately their consumers and their community start imitating that. They've had around 90,000 people imitating that content franchise and posting their own top shelf of their makeup and talking about what it means to them. So again, a really powerful company which has really harnessed the power of their community. And it can look a bit sort of inevitable from the outside when companies do this, but I think really it comes down to, when we work with companies to try and help them do this, a really simple view of three things, which is like, who are your super participants? Who are the people in the community? Because most people aren't going to do this, who are really going to have the energy and time and can find the right incentives to take part and really start driving the product forward. Secondly, equally importantly, who are the company stewards? Who are in the company? It might be customer service, it might be policy, it might be people in marketing. Who's really stewarding that relationship, and what's the relationship between these two? And is it centralized, and are the right incentives there? And then obviously, what's the relationship with the general participants, and how do incentives and how do the feedback loops work between each? So that operating structure is critical if you're going to try and pull that off. Okay, third pillar, tech-enabled, and this is really about products that kind of manage to scale with intent, but also with a lot of intimacy and benefit their customers. And I think Pinterest is a great example, a brand I know very well, work with them a lot, and their tech-enabled excellence is really due to a really principled and relentless focus on fostering an experience which really nurtures people's confidence. And as opposed to a lot of social media, there's no comparison, there's no thinking about other people, there's no quantification, and they've really committed to that over time. And they've made sacrifices. Like 2 years ago, they killed the like button, which was quite controversial at the time in terms of interaction and engagement rates and so on. But within 2 years, I think it's really been rewarded, that commitment there, because I think they've had the most successful of all the tech IPOs this year. They added 60 million active users in the last 12 months alone. So something really powerful going on there, and it's a brilliant product which is really driven by their purpose. And they add new things all the time to that. You know, they've seen a lot of mental health challenges in culture. They've seen a lot of triggers and signals of that on the platform. So they've introduced a new kind of companion experience. If certain searches will trigger you into a different experience if they sense there's a stress going on, there's no advertisers in there at all. They just think it's a good thing to do for their customers, which again, I think pays back in terms of the long-term loyalty that people have and advocacy have for Pinterest, and why it's kind of become this slow but now fast-moving unicorn. Closer to home, an example, N26, it really revolutionized the sort of banking experience with just their commitment to a beautiful, simple UI, which feels more like Spotify or Google Maps than a traditional bank. And even something like putting on a discrete mode is fun with them. It's just a wave of a hand. And that's really helped power their growth. And they're potentially going to be one of the most influential financial brands of the future. They're already at 46 countries and 3.5 million users. And it's not just, it's fun. When people start using N26, I think their average weekly visits to their finances goes up by about 3 times compared to incumbent banks. So they're getting a daily interaction with people, which is obviously a really powerful for their business growth. So it's a real commercial thing going on there as well. All right, final pillar, which is narrative-based. And I'm just going to give you one example here. It's one that I know really well because I was involved in it, but I make no apologies for that because I do think it's one of the most powerful examples of how a narrative can really take a company from being quite a niche player into being a mainstream leader. And this dates back, Airbnb, back to 2015, when they'd reached a stage where after really fast growth with early adopters and innovative audiences and particularly urban audiences, growth was tapping out, and they really needed to break into more mainstream cautious travelers, families in particular. And so there's a big challenge there for them, thinking about, well, how do we do that? What's the narrative to do that? Do we say that we're as safe and convenient as the hotels? And that isn't true, because obviously a lot of you will know, when you're fiddling around with a lockbox at 11 at night or whatever, it's not the most convenient way to travel. It never will be. So they needed another narrative. And the kernel of that was really found just looking at, okay, well, how do mainstream travelers talk about their experiences? What are they doing? And if you look at on TripAdvisor at the sentiment around one of the biggest tourist attractions in the world, quite often it's really low, because the promise is amazing for people, but then they get there and it can often be like this. It's lines, it's loneliness, and people feeling that they're acting a bit weird. Like, why am I looking at this sculpture? I don't even know if I like sculptures, but you're doing it. And this sort of thing happens to people. And I've certainly been there. And then we realized there was an interesting story there, because with Airbnb, it's real homes, it's real hosts, it's real neighborhoods. It's a much more natural way to travel in a lot of ways. And that came to this narrative of, okay, it's traveling like you live. It's not traveling like being this weird person that you're not. And that led to a global narrative and invitation across 3 continents, which was Don't Go There, Live There, which I'll just play a little bit of if we've got time. Oh, there's no sound. Don't worry. You might have seen it. It's a good film. It's sort of... There's that.
Live in Paris. When you Airbnb in Paris, you have your own home. Make your bed. Cook. The stuff you normally do. Don't go to LA. Don't go to New York. Don't go to Tokyo. Live there. Live in Malibu. Live in the East Village. Live in Shinagawa. Feel at home. Anywhere. Do your regular routine. Wherever you go, don't go there. Live there. Even if it's just for a night.
And critically, that did start before the sound came on saying, don't go to Paris, which was one of the most interesting things about it in terms of breakthrough and all of that. So two things on that. I think one is that obviously that narrative was really deeply embedded in the product. So at the same time as that was launching, you had host tips being added to the product. You had experiences being added to the product. So it was very much an all-company initiative. And secondly, I think for these, when we're looking for these big narratives that are driving growth for these companies, it's a big open challenge with lots of width in it, which can go global, but it's also really sharp. If you took the brand away from that, it would fall apart. And I think that's that combination of being very big and ambitious, but also really sharp and authentic to your brand's role is critical for a really successful narrative to scale. So pulling some lessons out of all of this then, in terms of when we're thinking about reimagining creativity and reimagining the brand board relationship, here is some things from me. So firstly, I think a wider definition of brand. And brand is a very amorphous thing, and it's always going to be a struggle to define it. But for us, it's these 4 things. That's how you create a brand these days, on excellence on these 4 pillars. Not everyone's brilliant on all 4, but you work on all 4, and that's how we work with our companies. And it's a good board diagnostic tool as well, because everyone's responsible for this, importantly. The brand isn't just this one thing, it's everyone. Secondly, a wider definition of creativity. To have that wider definition of brand, then we need to be thinking about, quite often creativity can sometimes be quite narrowly defined in terms of award-winning campaigns or award-winning work or a certain type of style. And really it's just about the original thing, which is the use of imagination to create brilliant ideas across different places. Connected to that, really to do that, thinking about the creative canvas as the whole company and not just its content is really important. And narrative is so important, but equally a lot of our time is spent doing workshops like this with operations teams, and that's the operations teams of N26 and all the different teams, now they have a new purpose, how are they all going to deliver on that, what are the initiatives they're going to do for the next 6 months, what are they going to change. So it's quite fiddly, clunky stuff, but it's absolutely critical, because as Claire was saying, it's D2C experiences are what driving these brands, and the experience is the brand. And finally, just going back to the riff thing of like building brands from the center and not trying to reverse in from marketing. And somehow it's that marketing has to feel like on the back foot about justifying brand, because brand for these companies, for the Airbnbs, for the Glossiers, for the New York Times, it's the CEO is absolutely embedded in that narrative. It probably has their fingerprints on that narrative. And when that happens, they can drive it into the investor experience. They can drive it into the employee experience. They'll make sure it's in the products and the brand. And it's not just marketing's job. And that's critical, because otherwise it's very, very hard to do. And I think we probably all tried that. So it can mean, in the short term, sacrificing maybe a bit of control and a bit of power and ownership, but in the longer term, getting much more influence. Because the word brand board rift, in a way, like the board is the brand, and a lot of those folks on the board are responsible for delivering the brand, and they need to realize that. So if we can all sign up to those evolved definitions, then I think it can make a meaningful contribution to the debate. Thank you for listening.